James Hoffa is missing. The family of the former Teamsters Union president and ex-convict reported Hoffa missing early today. His car was found outside a restaurant in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, not far from where the family lives. The police were asked whether they thought Hoffa had been kidnapped. Their answer was, well, his car was there and he was not.
Hello, and welcome to A People's History of Violence, the podcast where we do deep dives into histories, crimes, coups, conspiracies, cover-ups, assassinations, affairs, terrors, and trials. And where I'm your co-host, Isaac.
And I'm your co-host, Peter.
And Peter, after that long break, what are we talking about today?
Well, we're talking about the greatest threat facing our nation, which is anti-Semitism on college campuses.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I've got notes. Didn't you get my notes? You need to pay more attention to your email, Isaac. It might be anti-Semitic, but you don't pay attention to my emails.
It usually goes to junk for Peter.
Oh.
I just mark it as spam.
Yeah, it's too sad for me to continue this joke to think about all my emails.
Peter's had dozens of episode ideas, but I've just said like, no,
Yeah.
we want to do another 20 parts of Hoffa.
Yeah. I mean, my ideas are groundbreaking, but you won't hear about them because they're in Isaac's spam
I
folder.
run this show.
He does. He really does.
But really, though,
No, we're talking about Hoffa. We're talking about Hoffa and what happened to him.
And what happened to the Teamsters?
And what happened to the Teamsters in the aftermath.
So, as our listeners know, and as we've taken a while to get around to, on July 30th, 1975, James Brittle Hoffa disappeared. Cue some kind of sound effect. Okay, the eerie part is we just had this creepy ass sound effect happen outside as it was raining. I don't have the confidence to drop in sound effects.
Okay.
No, it was someone's brakes squealing. Their car is in a very bad way.
Yeah.
Their car is in a very bad way.
There.
So this episode is going to deal with not the disappearance, because I think that kind of obscures what we really know about what happened here. Just on its face. This episode will deal with the baiting, abduction, and murder of Jimmy Hoffa on July 30th, 1975. It's a systematic examination by your two pretty tired co-hosts after work of the competing timelines and scenarios, specifically the one that was most recently put forward by Jack Goldsmith, the one put forward by the FBI in the Hoffax memo, forensic evidence, chronologies of the main players, and what we think is the only likely scenario of what happened here.
Yeah, if you're into the kind of, nuts and bolts of establishing what happened in a particular instance, this is the episode for you. We're gonna try and break it down mostly off Isaac's indefatigable legwork going through the archives, and I'll mainly be here asking the questions that you as a listener might ask, mostly clarifications of things that we didn't pay enough attention to. We're gonna really break it down. So if you're into that kind of thing, I think you're in for a treat.
This is the part where you listen to this episode and then you'll be able to, actually, all of your friends who ever bring up Jimmy Hoffa again and get disinvited to every party.
Yeah, that's a common instance.
So, by the way, we're not going to get to every single detail that might happen.
No matter what it might sound like.
Yeah, no, we're not going to get to every single, mafia org chart that might be brought up, but the People's History of Violence brand guarantee means that by the end of this episode, you will know what happened. Although you'll also know that the real question with the Hoffa disappearance is not what happened and who arranged for him to be disappeared, but why did it never come to any kind of justice? Why does the FBI continue digging holes in the middle of nowhere? And why did, broadly speaking, the investigation get derailed beyond it ever being solved? So I should probably acknowledge some sources.
Yeah.
This is not from, my own investigation, clowning around Michigan.
Investigated the investigators.
So noted sources here, and we'll post some of this actually on the episode notes, but the Hoffa's memo, a full-on memorandum that the FBI put together for a kind of convening of investigators to talk about where they were supposed to go with this investigation in 76. That is the source of a lot of information here, as well as some of the FBI files that have been put onto the FBI's vault due to Freedom of Information Act requests that have been filed by others. Dan Moldea's The Hoffa Wars, Stephen Brill's book, The Teamsters, especially, and an obscure book called Jimmy Hoffa is Missing: The Gap by David Tubman for his timeline analysis, the book In Hoffa's Shadow by Jack Goldsmith, and one of my personal favorites, Rank and File Rebellion by Dan Labatz. I'd like to start off this episode before we get into the nitty-gritty facts of July 30th, 1975, with two quotes that kind of put this entire abduction and disappearance in perspective. And the first I just kind of came across in a newspaper archive, but in August of 1975, just 2 weeks after Jimmy Hoffa was supposed to go to a meeting and disappeared, and the entire country was being reported on the news nightly about how Jimmy Hoffa's disappeared and what might have happened to him. With the entire country kind of wondering where Hoffa was and who was behind it, a Los Angeles Times reporter got a tip from an unusual source. The veteran gangster and actual James Ellroy character, Mickey Cohen, the one-time crime boss of the Los Angeles Syndicate. Peter, do you know who Mickey Cohen is?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, he was, if I remember right, he was associated with the Chicago outfit, right? Or one of the other.
I think he took the Chicago outfit out to LA.
Yes. He was associated with them because for a while there, I think a lot of the Western cities were basically colonies in an organized crime sense of families back east. I think the Chicago mob took a lot of initiative there, particularly in LA. And yeah, he was pretty open about being, one of the last, arguably, really. I mean, there's Gotti and whoever, but he was almost more of a parody.
But Gotti wouldn't be able to just brag openly about owning the police department or owning the mayor.
No, he was quite flashy.
Yeah.
And he hobnobbed with celebrities, if I remember right. And that's not just a James Ellroy filigree.
Right.
Yeah, he was did Johnny Stompanato work for him?
I don't know.
Okay. Johnny Stompanato was lover of Lana Turner, who was killed by Lana Turner's daughter.
Oh shit!
During a ugly domestic incident. If I'm remembering my Decide Another podcast, you must remember this well enough. Shouts out, Karina Longworth. Love her waspy cadences. Anyway,
so Mickey Cohen's kind of reign over Los Angeles as the criminal overlord was, I feel peaked in the 40s.
Yeah.
Right? There was a little bit in the 50s, but he had been long retired after having served multiple prison sentences. In his retirement, he obviously kept up with, the made men and so on that he knew from the old Jewish mob and Italian mob. And immediately after Hoffa's disappearance, Mickey Cohen seemed to have sources that gave him something like a whole story. And he told with a grim resignation, quote, "They'll never see hide nor hair of him again. He'll never see the light of day. The same thing happened to two of my guys." And, quote, "There'll be no body," Cohen said. And indeed, as you'll find, there isn't. At least that's what we think.
I mean, we're pretty sure it's under Dodger Stadium, not Dodger.
Giant Stadium.
I know that's not what we actually think.
Yeah.
I completely thought that. Cut it.
And the other quote that I wanted to bring up is about a year after his disappearance, a Teamster dissident, a real righteous guy, was quoted as saying, Teamster rank and filers, the people who wanted dissent from the crooked leadership and the authoritarian people running the union, Teamster rank and filers are worried that what happened to Hoffa could happen to them. That was Arthur Fox who said that. There was a very real fear created by Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. It wasn't just a kind of a crime where it's like, well, live by the sword, die by the sword, gangsters kill gangsters, and guess he got tied up with the wrong people. It sent a message to the people who, alliance of convenience or not, had backed Hoffa in this kind of final attempt to take back over the Union and put it in a fighting direction. But we should probably recap the lead up from our previous two episodes, at least pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So previously on the People's History of Violence Hoffa series.
Yes.
A People's History of Violence Hoffa series, the presidency for Hoffa was actually coming closer. The presidency of the Teamsters again, along with control of the nation's roadways, its vital arteries. Fitzsimmons, the president who took over from Hoffa after he went to prison, increasingly felt boxed in and faced the loss of power over the Teamsters, a whole lot of cash, and kind of an immunity from prosecution that came from being a real collaborator with the US government in making sure that there weren't labor problems as the government worried about inflation, the government, I should say, and Wall Street and everyone else in the middle class. Now, Fitzsimmons tried intimidating Hoffa's supporters, especially in Hoffa's home local of 299, by sending his kind of one-eyed ogre over to 299 and blowing up people's boats, burning down barns, shooting people, beating them up, but it didn't really stop the campaign. It didn't really stop the Hoffa problem. So leading up to Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance, Fitzsimmons started letting slip at the La Costa golf course, where he met with other Teamster vice presidents and mafia leaders and Richard Nixon. I wish I was making that up, but it's all there. He starts letting slip that the Hoffa problem was about to be taken care of. And he even issued a warning to Hoffa's kind of a more cowardly friend, Harold Gibbons, but nonetheless, pretty good guy on the whole. The way that the Hoffa problem was going to be taken care of, though, was through kind of a bait. In some accounts, in this bait was going to be a peace meeting with the leader of Local 560 on the East Coast in New Jersey, Tony Provenzano, who was kind of like a baron on the East Coast, controlling his little fiefdom in New Jersey and in parts of New York.
Yeah, so the stereotypical mob run union, right? More so than anything Hoffa ever ran directly, no-show jobs, all kinds of crooked dealings, really brutal authoritarian control of the rank and file, so on and so forth. That was Provenzano's thing, and he was on the side of Fitzsimmons.
Yes. In fact, all of the major mob-aligned unions aligned with Fitzsimmons. Fitzsimmons was giving them a blank check to just siphon off money from the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund and other pension funds, and plow that into mob-owned front projects, including real estate, casinos, hotels, and so on. But Provenzano held out the possibility of burying the hatchet with Jimmy Hoffa and, maybe possibly backing him or not backing him in his campaign to take back the presidency. I read in some accounts that Hoffa previously went to a peace meeting with Tony Provenzano, only for the peace meeting to kind of fall apart because Tony Provenzano was too drunk.
Oh yeah, that'll happen.
Which Jimmy Hoffa doesn't like.
Happen to Hoffa.
Yeah, he does not drink or do much of anything.
Yeah,
except kind of just siphon off money.
Yeah, just doing business was his business was his hobby.
Hoffa, however, had a close relationship with a Detroit mafia associate named Tony Giacalone. Tony Giacalone maintained a close enough relationship with Hoffa that he could kind of be the go-between, the mediator between Hoffa and Provenzano, and squash the beef. And as we said, the kind of the quid pro quo here is that there would maybe be some kind of massive favor, like a loan from the pension fund or a payoff, and Tony Provenzano would say, we're square, and he would not oppose Jimmy Hoffa trying to take back over the presidency. This was the implication of several phone calls, at least, that Hoffa had with Tony Giacalone, who's acting as the mediator. But even at first glance, this seems to be pretextual. After a couple of these calls, Hoffa was asked, would he really meet with Tony Provenzano? And he said, no, Tony Pro's a bum. Which back then was apparently like a really bad insult, like calling someone a punk, would be the next rung down there. In the lead up to July 30th, 1975, Hoffa did agree to this meeting. And we know that he agreed to this meeting because, one, he told several people, but he also left a note taped to a lamp that became in his house, in his little office area of the house, like a lamp on his desk. And apparently he left the notes of stuff that he was supposed to do the next day that he would then incorporate into like a bigger notepad. And on the lamp was taped a message which ends up being almost like a Hardy Boys type clue to what happened, which is, I'm quoting it, TG 2:30, Wednesday, 14-mile, Tell Fox Rest, Maple Road. And this is a kind of a shorthand note-taking that was pretty common for Hoffa. So we'll translate because the FBI already did that. So TG was Tony Giacalone, that guy who was acting as a mediator between Hoffa and King of New Jersey, Tony Provenzano. 2:30 Wednesday was a meeting at 2:30 p.m. on July 30th, 1975. It was a Wednesday. And 14-mile Telefox Rest Maple Road is the approximate address for a restaurant called the Marcus Red Fox. The last sightings of Hoffa alive are outside of. And I should also note that the last sightings of Hoffa alive are of him outside his car on the side of the Marcus Red Fox restaurant that faces Maple Road. So that's probably, he was supposed to be on the Maple Road side of the restaurant. Now, surely, Peter, you remember like 4 episodes ago when we talked about Tony Provenzano's League of Killers?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we deal with so many leagues of killers that
it's kind of our business.
It is.
But just to remind the audience, Provenzano's lieutenants, the Bergoglio brothers, Salvatore and Gabriel, kind of play the role of effective killers in this story that the heavies that we previously talked about in the last episode of Roland McMaster do not.
Right. Yeah, there's levels to this game, as they say.
Yeah, McMaster's heavies were the type that could come in and really just like bust up a bar.
Yeah.
They're kind of like the villains in like any like A-Team episode who are supposed to you're supposed to get scared out of town.
Yeah.
And then they can't.
Right.
But the Bergoglio brothers and Provenzano's other men, like the Andretta brothers, they're the real like dead-eyed killers. They come in, they kill you, and then you're gone.
Yeah.
They have no problem with killing and annihilating the corpses of dissidents in Provenzano's own union, traitors to their enterprise, and any other inconvenient people that get in the way of the flow of the money to Tony Pro, who was the highest paid Teamster official. And I think it's also probably important to say that it shows that Tony Pro doesn't really contract his killings out. He's the guy who gets contracted. These are his men. And just to refresh our listeners' memory, so you don't have to go all the way back to Hoffa Part 3, the Bergoglio brothers were witness doing and eventually indicted for their involvement in other high-profile killings like that of a union official named Tony Three Fingers Castellito. Because he had 3 fingers on one hand.
3 fingers total on all hands.
Did he have 3 fingers?
No.
God damn it.
Sorry.
So in that killing, there was a method that they went by. This is like murder by numbers. They arranged a verifiable alibi for the guy who arranged the killing, Tony Provenzano, where he was at a wedding with like 100 witnesses, obviously. They arranged a bait and trap meeting in which they abducted Three Fingers Castellito. And then they quickly, when he got to that meeting, strangled and knocked him senseless. And then they disposed of the body so that should it never could be found, possibly using a tree shredder, like Fargo.
Like Fargo, yeah. Yeah, so really, you know, more like more like butchers than like soldiers.
Yeah.
Because people get the impression that, you know, to be a killer, you have to be somebody who's like adept at combat in like the D&D sense, right? Whereas like, you know, that would be closer to the thing, you know, actually getting into a fight with somebody that would be more for the McMaster type goons in theory, but actually killing somebody is a little bit different, especially if like they're essentially defenseless. It's a lot harder to kill somebody, I think, than a lot of people realize, like a full-grown adult, especially in a way that won't leave a ton of evidence.
Yeah. And I mean, with Salvatore Bergoglio in particular, there's, you know, it's all rumored, as it often is in like mafia talk, but they think that he killed as many as 20 people for the Genovese crime family.
Yeah.
And these aren't like, you know, like you said, they're not like mercenary operator missions.
Yeah.
It's just disposing of people.
Yeah.
As though they were like racks of meat.
Yeah.
And it's pretty disturbing, dude.
Yeah.
Pretty bad guy.
Yeah.
So why did Jimmy Hoffa go to the meeting? Is a question that I asked. And even the FBI in the Hoffa memo was like, so it's unclear why he actually went to the meeting.
I mean, presumably he didn't know that the Bergoglios were in town, right?
Presumably, although he did know both of them.
Huh.
Like he knew them as well as Tony Provenzano. Like if he saw Salvatore Bergoglio, he wouldn't think like, oh, I'm dead.
Right.
Because Bergoglio, it was also
a teamster.
Yeah, nominally he's a treasurer of local 560
Right.
who makes over $100,000 a year, 93,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think two like probable reasons was he wanted to appear to be remain open to the possibility of resolving things, so that, you know, maybe Tony Provenzano doesn't oppose him, or maybe a deal could be worked out later on, because that's what he did. He cut deals with all kinds of people, and what got him killed. But also there's the fact that you can't just say no to Tony Provenzano.
Right. Yeah, at that point, arguably he might have been in like a war.
Yeah, and I mean, Hoffa has friends, he has family, all of whom could be abducted and killed. Like these are seriously dangerous people.
Yeah.
And not that Hoffa's not dangerous himself. I mean, he brought a gun to the meeting, actually, just not on him.
What do you mean when you say he brought a gun, just not on?
Oh, there was a gun found in the car that was left at the Moxbury Fox.
Okay, yeah. So they didn't dispose of it with. Oh yeah, so it wouldn't have been on his person.
Right, exactly. But as we know, on July 30th, 75, Hoffa left and failed to return home. His wife Josephine panics. She calls her son Jimmy Hoffa Jr. And when word of the disappearance becomes public shortly thereafter, the family begins receiving what are definitely kind of crank extortion ransomy type calls. And these are totally bogus calls, saying like, I have Jimmy Hoffa and you can give me $2 million, I'll get them. But because it's extortion and kidnapping, that actually allows an avenue for the FBI to come into the investigation, because the Hoffa family actually immediately after his disappearance did not trust the Michigan State Police or the Detroit Police to actually investigate this in a clear way and actually find his abductors or killers. So immediately the FBI were told about the meeting with Tony Giacalone and Tony Provenzano, because Hoffa had told like upwards of 3 or 4 people that he's having a meeting with Tony Provenzano and Tony Giacalone.
So he took some precautions.
Yeah.
And maybe also it was just what he usually did.
Well, that's the thing, is actually before this like lead up to the disappearance, Hoffa, his regular practice was to not tell anybody where he was going or anybody what he was doing. He kept that all completely close to the chest, and he tried to be unpredictable because he thought the feds were tailing him out all the time. But in the lead up to the disappearance, because of the warning he received of like, stop running for president or else, he flipped it and he started telling everybody who he was meeting with and everybody where he was going. The FBI, however, is they get told he was having a meeting with Tony Giacalone and Tony Provenzano, and they quickly find that both Giacalone and Provenzano have completely provable alibis, just alibied up. And in Tony Giacalone's case, the FBI finds that he appeared to have been trying really hard to establish an alibi, walking around the Southfield Athletic Club on July 30th saying, hey, do you know what time it is?
Awesome.
I'm going to get my face shaved. I'm going to get a massage. What time is it? Oh, 2 o'clock. I'm going to go do this now. So the FBI was also told a clue that gets hotly contested, but is really important, which is they were told by his son and Josephine Hoffa and even other Teamsters, Hoffa would not simply get into a car, at a meet without someone he trusted being there. And immediately they were told that the person that they suspected could have been the trusted person who would have him get in the car had Hoffa get into the car with them and leave the Marcus Red Fox, would be Chucky O'Brien. Charles O'Brien, his one-time kind of adopted son.
Yeah, the kind of fuck up adopted kid.
Yeah, the ultimate fail son.
Yeah.
So here is our best timeline of Hoffa's day according to the FBI investigation. Now, leading up to the meeting, of course, Hoffa tells his wife, his son, his friend Louis Linto, a former Teamster who ran an airport transportation company, who's like driving people to and from Detroit Airport, who also acted as kind of his gatekeeper, that he was going to this meeting with Tony Jack and Tony Pro, as he called Tony Giacalone and Tony Provenzano. Tony Giacalone finally arranges for the July 30th meeting, Tony Pro in 2 separate calls with Louis Linto, that friend of Hoffa's, on July 26th. And note that date for the future.
So like 4 days before.
Yeah. At 1:20 p.m. on July 30th, Hoffa eats a full lunch with his wife at his nice little like dacha type house on Lake Orion in Michigan. I feel like there's probably some like weird Michigan pronunciation. It's like, no, it's Lake Orion.
Yeah.
That I'm going to find out about later.
Yeah.
He tells his wife he's going to the meeting and he's going to be back by 4 p.m. for dinner. And then he'll pick up some steaks on the way home. From 1:30 to 1:40 p.m. or between those times, Hoffa stops by the business of his friend and gatekeeper, Louis Linto, called Airport Service Lines. He's looking for Linto because in Hoffa's account, and it's apparent to all the witnesses, Linto is supposed to come with him to the meeting that he had just been arranged 4 days before. And multiple employees of this airport limo company see Hoffa, including one named Elmer Reeves, and tell him that Linto isn't there right now.
Do we know where he is now?
So according to Linto, he had just been taking lunch at that time and would come back with his secretary after Hoffa left.
Okay.
But
Hoffa didn't wait around for him.
no,
It was pre-cell phone, so
exactly. Now, Elmer Reeves, an employee of that airport service lines, he talks to Hoffa, and this is a funny part of the encounters with Hoffa because everybody seems to remember their encounter with Hoffa because they like walk up to them, they're like, "Hey, can you help me out with my pension or this one thing that's going on with me at work?"
Yeah.
Like we talked about this before, but like everybody walks up to like Hoffa had this like extremely personalistic relationship where like people just like line up outside his door.
Yeah, to get favor of some kind.
Exactly. And so he would just walk up to him and be like, "Hey, Jimmy Hoffa. Anyways, I haven't been able to get my pension for 2 months. What's going on?"
Yeah.
So Reeves talks to Hoffa about that, asks for help with his pension. And then Hoffa says he has to go to an urgent meeting with Tony P and Tony G. Again, just publicly declaring his whereabouts.
Including by name.
Including, by name.
Yeah.
By name. At one point, Reeves thought he heard a third name, and then they bring it out through hypnosis. I'm just gonna say that these are the 2 names we know for sure.
Right.
And that other one seems a little fishy. Between 2:05 and 2:50 p.m., Hoffa is at the Marcus Red Fox restaurant. Now, he's not actually dressed to go into the restaurant, which actually has a strict dress code of you have to have a jacket and a tie. Instead, he's in this tucked in polo thing and slacks because he's just supposed to, and this is the inference, just meet these guys there outside the Marcus Red Fox and then go to another place where they're going to have their sit down. But this becomes a kind of a time anchor here. Between 2 p.m. and 2:45, a succession of witnesses see Hoffa waiting outside the Marcus Red Fox, and most of them talk to him because, like we said, as far as they're concerned, in Detroit, he's the GOAT and can also get them stuff.
He's the man. Yeah. He's who you talk to. It'd be
They,
like seeing Gronk. up there doing-
hey, it's Jimmy Hoffa waiting outside the restaurant.
Yeah,
They describe his clothing consistently, and this is how we know what he was wearing that day, besides what Josephine remembered. One of them is able to relate that Hoffa told him that his wife, Josephine Hoffa, was about to have surgery to remove a cataract, which was both true and not public information.
right. As men in late middle age, they're talking about the health conditions of the people in their lives as they do. Yeah.
Meaning that this witness wasn't just like, oh yeah, I saw Hoffa, I'm a witness too,
Yeah.
talk to me, tabloids. He could not have made this up.
Yeah.
He had non-public information. The FBI then kind of gathered these potential eyewitnesses and managed to place each of them inside the restaurant, entering, eating, and exiting in a chronological order using register records and timestamp checks, which combined with the information on what they remembered ordering allowed the FBI to, quote, place the customers in the restaurant ordering their food and paying their bills within a much more specific time than even they could remember. So this becomes a set of pretty hard evidence as to when people saw him and when he was still alive. The last witness from this time saw him at the latest at 2:50 p.m., they think. The other kind of time anchor too of when Hoffa was last seen alive is that sometime between 2:30 and 2:40 p.m., the FBI thinks that he calls Louis Linteau, that airport service guy, from a hardware store payphone. Now, Louis Linteau remembered that he had called local 299, Hoffa's home local, about an issue he was having, and then shortly after that call, like hang up the phone, pick up, call another guy. He called a guy named Thomas Carter. The FBI was able to find with the Bell telephone records that Louis Linteau called local 299 at 2:35 p.m. on the dot. So, and this is the part that gets interesting. In the middle of the call after that 299 call, the call with Mr. Carter, Carter remembers that Linteau has someone tell him that Jimmy Hoffa is on the other line and he needs to get off the phone. So then Linteau hangs up the call with Carter and talks to Hoffa. So this becomes a bit of an interesting little conflict, because Linteau tries to place when he heard Hoffa last alive a full hour later, outside what everything else shows to be the abduction window.
So Linteau says, Linteau says he talked on the phone with Hoffa an hour later?
Yes.
Okay, and he was calling from the payphone.
Yes.
Do the payphone records show anything useful?
The FBI wasn't able to get the payphone records. All they, as far as the telephone records that they had,
Yeah.
all they have is the records of local 299. So they know that local 299 got this call from Linteau that immediately preceded the Hoffa call at 2:35.
Yeah.
But
How can they not get the payphone records?
I don't know.
For a case of this magnitude. I mean, maybe
I
it doesn't
think
matter
back.
how much
I think
anything-
back then, basically, you couldn't necessarily get the phone records for any line unless you had a tap and trace on it,
Huh,
as I understand.
interesting.
But yeah, even though if you take his word, Linteau's word, that this call that Thomas Carter was on and then Hoffa breaks in on happens just after the local 299 call, then it places it around like between 2:30 and 2:40.
Did he say that was Linteau's call with 299?
Yes.
Did he say what Hoffa talked about during this call?
Yes. He said, the sons of bitches didn't show up. Where the hell are they? Have you heard from Tony Jack? Meaning Tony Jack alone.
Yeah.
Because they hadn't shown up yet. Hoffa also called his wife Josephine. She thinks around this 2:30 to 2:40 time window, also from the hardware store payphone. And he tells her that if Tony Giacalone doesn't show up soon, he's going to leave and come home, and he's going to pick up the steaks on the way.
So it sounds like the abduction window is actually shorter than what we're saying. It sounds like it's 2:40 till some other time.
Yeah. I guess I should have said the the 2 to 2:45 is like the window of like the last people to see him
Right,
alive,
yes, yeah.
in the times that we last know he was confirmably alive.
Yes.
But like the abduction window has to be, you know, pretty much right after that call.
Yeah, and then until, I don't know when, maybe no.
Yeah, I mean, we can't know like the outside bound, but we'll talk about that when we talk about
Okay.
the kind of the counter timeline that gets
Yes,
put by the biggest suspect here.
okay,
So then there is one eyewitness who does see Jimmy Hoffa enter into a car. There is a delivery driver, a truck driver, the silent heroes of this entire series,
yeah,
who, pulling into the Marcus Red Fox parking lot to make his delivery, has to practically swerve and stop out of the way of a kind of maroon Lincoln or Mercury that is leaving. And he sees Jimmy Hoffa getting inside of it, and then it swerves toward him. And you can bet that a truck driver in Detroit probably knows what Jimmy Hoffa looks like. So the FBI, because they were told that Jimmy Hoffa probably wouldn't get into a car and with someone he didn't trust, didn't know well, and he might get into a car with Chucky O'Brien, they already had their interest piqued about Charles Chucky O'Brien. So first, of course, Charles O'Brien was named as that potential kind of bait suspect, the worm on the end of a hook for Hoffa to get abducted. And the FBI was, of course, looking into his whereabouts that day. And what they also found suspiciously from their view was that O'Brien was supposed to go to Toronto that day on July 30th for a meeting with a Teamster rep in Toronto, but didn't show up. And not only did he not show up, but he also didn't tell anybody that he wasn't going to the meeting. Bobby Holmes Sr., who has been a part of the story all the way back to like episode 1 and 2. He's basically like one of Hoffa's day ones. He says that no one told him that Chucky O'Brien wasn't going to show up, and then he waited at the airport in Detroit to pick up O'Brien from when he was supposed to come back from Toronto. But in fact, O'Brien stayed in Detroit the entire time.
I mean, he is a pretty inconsiderate guy.
Yeah, he is in general just kind of an asshole.
So it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't update the poor schlub who was supposed to pick him up from the airport, but yes.
True. But the FBI was able to lock in some parts of a timeline, both from interviews with O'Brien and interviews with other witnesses.
O'Brien time.
The O'Brien timeline.
Yes.
Yes. So in the morning of July 30th, and this made the FBI even more suspicious, from 7:15 to 8:30 a.m., O'Brien got dropped off by his friend Marvin Adele within eyesight of the Marcus Red Fox in the same shopping center parking lot, and is just looking right at it when he gets picked up. He waits to get picked up by Bobby Holmes Jr., as he did actually every day of the preceding week. In the lead up to the disappearance also, the FBI had noticed that per the phone calls on O'Brien's call records and so on, he'd been talking to Tony Giacalone more and more leading up to the meeting. Now, after he gets picked up by Bobby Holmes Jr. from the Marcus Red Fox parking lot.
And that would have been in the morning.
Yeah.
And previously, he was supposed to be picked up by the same guy at the airport.
No, that's Bobby Holmes Sr., who was supposed to pick him up at the airport.
So then his kid picks him up from the Marcus Red Fox the morning of the 30th.
Yes, the morning of the abduction.
Yes.
So after he gets picked up from the Marcus Red Fox by Bobby Holmes Jr., Jr. drops him off at local 299, where O'Brien at that time worked as a kind of general organizer, meaning a kind of a walk around guy.
Yeah.
Who does favors for Frank Fitzsimmons and Roland McMaster.
Yeah.
Now, supposedly when he arrives, he learns that there is a fish delivery around noontime of a Coho salmon for Bobby Holmes Sr., not Jr., at the local 299 office. And there's some dispute about this, but it looks like the secretary at local 299 signs for the delivery of this Coho salmon, which is a gift for Bobby Holmes from, some organized company in Alaska to be like, thank you, Mr. Holmes, for, resolving our labor disputes.
For letting our trucks go forward.
Yes, a tribute, if you will.
Yes.
So the senders described it as a big salmon for a Coho salmon, which is like a 12-pound salmon. That's really on the high end. of Coho salmon weight.
Yeah.
In later stories, this salmon just gets like bigger and bigger until it's like 40 pounds,
Right.
which makes it like
all too much salmon.
the world record of Coho salmon
Yeah.
that's ever been caught.
So it's a real fish tale.
Yeah, it gets to be a fishy story.
Nice.
Yeah,
Got it.
nice. But yeah, Tucky O'Brien keeps increasing the size of the fish each time he talks about this story, in part to talk about like how much fish blood was leaking out of the box and into the car he put it in. And oh my God, there was fish blood everywhere. This part of the story becomes a part of his defense to say that he didn't kill Jimmy Hoffa, but that gets a little technical.
And we'll find out how that is later, I suppose.
Yeah, in part, I'll say now, the reason that he starts talking about how big and wet this fish is that it appears to shift the size of the fish to account for blood stains that the FBI says they found in the car he was driving.
Okay, the car that Chucky was driving.
Yes.
Which in our theory is the car that Hoffa was willing to go into.
Precisely.
And there was blood in the back.
Yeah.
But can't the FBI tell the difference between fish and human blood?
And indeed, they did say, at least to reporters, that they determined that it was fish blood later on.
I say.
But the more important reason is it allows them to shift a couple of events in the timeline later on by saying that, oh my God, there's so much fish blood in this car. I have to get it cleaned. I have to go to the car wash for a long time.
Honestly, you would feel like any amount of fish, especially if you're like a touchy car guy, like all those guys probably were.
Oh yeah.
You know, I feel like any amount of fish goo, or even just having a fish in the car just wrapped up in cardboard. If I were one of those guys, I'd get it cleaned anyway. So I think he was protesting a little too much.
Yeah.
Making it 40 pounds.
So he gets this fish, which is probably 12 pounds.
Yeah.
But it could be packed in like a lot of ice.
Yeah.
Right. And there is a local 299 station wagon that he could use to deliver this salmon to its intended recipient, Bobby Holmes Sr. But he either chooses not to use it or he can't find the keys for that station wagon. And instead, he calls up his good friend Joey Giacalone, the son of Tony Giacalone, the mafia associate, and says, hey, can you bring me your car to use? Which Joey Giacalone does. And this, as it happens, is a beautiful maroon car. A Mercury Marquis. So taking this.
And that was the color of the car.
That was
truck driver.
Yeah, that was the exact color of the car seen by the delivery truck driver. And he said the delivery truck driver said it was a flashy car. So he has this beautiful maroon Mercury Marquis.
I do like a Marquis or a Grand Marquis. Fine old American type car.
And he takes a big old fish and he puts it in the back seat.
Yeah, terrible mistake.
At 1:30 or 12:30 or 2 p.m., depending on which account of O'Brien you believe, he then goes to the Detroit suburbs where Bobby Holmes Sr.'s residence is. And he drops off the fish and he cuts it up and he talks to Bobby Holmes' grandkids. And from the Holmes residence, he decides that an important thing for him to do is to call Tony Giacalone.
Okay, so Chucky O'Brien is at the Holmes house cutting up fish in the afternoon of the 30th.
Yes.
And then he calls Tony Giacalone,
who Hoffa's supposed to be meeting with,
at home. Okay, is it record?
Well, actually, he calls him at the Southfield Athletic Club, which is his kind of it's his. The Southfield Athletic Club is kind of like Tony Giacalone's like Bada Bing. It's just the place where he kind of like hangs out.
Yeah. So and like, do they have like the length of this phone call? Did they actually talk?
The phone call is very short, and it appears to just consist in O'Brien getting told that Tony Giacalone is busy right now getting a massage.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a critical time period coming up between 2:15 and 2:50, because that's when Hoffa's last seen alive.
Yes.
O'Brien either goes to the Southfield Athletic Club or he goes to Jack's car wash. And if you follow O'Brien's story, of course, he says, oh my God, I got so much fish blood in this beautiful Mercury Marquis. I have to go to Jack's car wash right now
Yeah.
and clean up all this fish blood. No one from Jack's car wash can remember him being there
Okay.
the entire day. No one remembers cleaning up any fish blood at the car.
Now, is it like a full service place, or is it one of those places, self-service places?
It's one of them full service places. And it has a gas station, right? Like directly adjacent to it.
Yeah.
And it's this step in the journey where O'Brien is able to kind of marshal some scraps of evidence that he did the thing that he was saying he did. So he has a charge on his official union credit card for $9.60 for gas at that gas station that's next to Jack's car wash. And he also has a receipt from Jack's car wash, which is stamped for July 30th, 1975. But it doesn't say what time he did it. Neither of these things say what time he actually did anything. Now, O'Brien is saying that he was at Jack's car wash during this critical window of time when Hoffa is standing outside the Marcus Red Fox being like, where the hell is Tony Giacalone, and being about to be abducted. However, but depending on which account you go by, O'Brien, in his original account, he either goes to Jack's car wash and then he goes to the Southfield Athletic Club where Tony Giacalone gives him $200 for his daughter's birthday. That's his original account. And this is the funny thing. A repairman at the Southfield Athletic Club observes O'Brien with Giacalone. An impartial witness is like, yeah, he's right there. He's talking to Tony Giacalone. And this isn't an alibi witness. In the early 2000s, however, O'Brien goes back on this story and says that he was never at the Southfield Athletic Club. And he says that he made that part up to try to get an alibi for Hoffa's disappearance. And instead, he says that he was at the car wash the entire time. So this puts us in another position where the one place where he is actually observed by like a witness who's not a criminal or a suspect in the disappearance, the Southfield Athletic Club, is the place that he denies he was at all.
Right.
And the place he says he was at, Jack's car wash, is a place where no one sees him. No one says that he was there at that time.
He does have a credit card charge.
He does have the credit card charge.
Which isn't the same as being at the car wash.
But, and we'll get to this, there is a second part of the day, long after Jimmy Hoffa's disappeared, where Chucky O'Brien admits to going back to Jack's car wash.
Okay.
And back to the gas station.
Right, because it doesn't have a time on the receipt.
Exactly. So he could have just gone there later.
Yeah. Also, what was I? So did the person who saw him, the witness at the athletic club, say what time they saw him?
Yes. He put it between 2:15 and 2:20 p.m.
Okay.
So Hoffa's still waiting out there outside the Marcus Red Fox. It's within driving distance of the Southfield Athletic Club. They're pretty close. So this is still within the timeline of abduction. It doesn't alibi him out at all.
Right. Yeah.
The way that the FBI kind of read this sighting, though, of O'Brien at the Southfield Athletic Club is that O'Brien, who, you know, has run up tremendous like gambling debts and owes all kinds of favors to people like Tony Giacalone, he's wanting to back out of having a role in the abduction.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of slow walking everything he's supposed to do that day. He says, you know, rather than canceling his appointment in Toronto, he keeps it.
Yeah.
Rather than, you know, just going straight to where he's supposed to, you know, do a murder abduction, he's like, oh, I got to take this fish. And he's kind of hoping that it falls apart or someone else.
Right. Someone cancels or someone else does it.
Yeah. Someone else just takes it away from him.
Yeah.
And maybe, you know, given these other meetings that were set up with Jimmy Hoffa, maybe a similar kind of thing happened. Maybe there were abduction plans that just fell apart.
Right.
And O'Brien's kind of just hoping that he doesn't have to do what he has to do. But O'Brien owes a lot of money to Giacalone.
Yeah.
And he owes a lot of favors to Fitzsimmons, we'll also talk about. But as I said, his kind of defense or alibi to all of this, I was involved in the disappearance stuff, is I was at the car wash. After all, I had to be at the car wash because there was fish blood all over the back of the car. And the FBI even found fish blood. Slight aside, Jack Goldsmith, Chucky O'Brien's stepson, in an email back to me, said that in his review of the FBI reports, he couldn't find any mention of any blood at all. Which I don't understand, because there's a sequence of New York Times and Detroit Free Press reports that have sources in the FBI saying we found blood in the back of the car, and then pulling back and saying, oops, it was fish blood after a laboratory analysis.
Yeah.
So either they were just lying the entire time to the press, or the report's gone missing, which I think is the more likely scenario. But I will credit Jack Goldsmith for saying that he hasn't found anything in the FBI reports about that. Now, here's the exclusive, as far as I'm concerned, for why the car wash story doesn't stack up. The car wash alibi, which is, this car is dirty as shit.
When the FBI looks at it.
Yeah, the FBI looks at this car like 2 weeks later. They get a warrant, they take the car, and they go inside it. The car has trash from O'Brien, like from stuff he was doing that day. The car has O'Brien's fingerprints still in it.
Had he been driving it around those 2 weeks?
No, Brian was in another state after a couple days after July 30th. He's in another state. He never borrows the Mercury Marquis again. So if it still has his fingerprints in it, it's from July 30th, 1975.
It's not his car.
Yeah, it's Joey Giacaloni's car.
Yeah.
Also, it's just a mess. Like there's hair in it. There's like I said, there are actually like the fish blood stains in the car, so it's not like he really got it detailed.
Yeah.
And there's just random sizes of ammunition and a shotgun in the car, just laying around. Like there was a holster beneath the driver's seat.
Listen, it's not illegal to have a lot of guns and ammunition in your car.
This car was not cleaned at all.
Okay. Well, maybe they cleaned around the guns and the fish blood.
Can you imagine that, like taking that to the car wash, and just these like two guys like walk up or whatever who are just like there to clean your car, and they're just having to like brush aside like the 30 caliber and 45 caliber cartridges of ammunition. They're like, he's not a mafia guy. I'm not cleaning a mafia guy's car. Oh, there's his shotgun. I'll just put this shotgun aside.
See, I've never had my car detailed, certainly not on the inside, so I don't really know what it's like.
They do move stuff aside, but I feel like they would be pretty weirded out if it's like, oh yeah, that's just my guns and my trash and
fish blood.
My fish blood. Don't worry about the fish blood.
Yeah.
So I just don't think he had it washed.
Right. It's not a real alibi.
Yeah.
Or a credible alibi.
So supposedly after he gets the car washed, he then goes to Liftall, which is the car rental company owned by Joey Giacaloni. And probably a mob front, but he goes to Liftall and he drops off the car with Joey Giacaloni, and Joey Giacaloni then drives him back to local 299
in the same car.
In the same car.
Okay. Now
Chucky O'Brien is seen kind of at the end of this sequence of events, whatever happened, at local 299, but like the timing of seeing him at local 299 is like really inconsistent. A secretary says that she sees him between 2:30 and 4:30, but he claimed when he got to local 299 there was no secretary because she'd already gone for the day. And her other time estimates were inconsistent with what he said he was doing. Like if he was there at 2:30, it can't be at Jack's car wash. Another witness, Destine Kiff, the office manager, claimed to see him between 2:30 and 3 o'clock, and then 3:30 and 4 p.m. The first part of which is hard to square because either he's like all the way back at Bobby Holmes's house, or he's at the car wash, or he's abducting Hoffa.
Yeah.
The FBI concluded that the only firm time that they could establish at local 299 with Chucky there was like between 4 and 4:30 p.m. because a guy named Joe Valenti remembered and had been saying the entire time, including to Jimmy Hoffa Jr., Chucky O'Brien called me for a ride at like around 4:05. And I said, like, maybe I could give him a ride. And then he just showed up. And Valenti's office is in the same office complex, like union office complex as local 299. So it's just like a walk away from 299 to Joe Valenti's office.
Yeah, so plenty of time to have been involved with the abduction.
Oh yeah. Like, because that only puts him at 299 at like 4:05 or 4:15.
Yeah.
Still going on with Chucky O'Brien's timeline, Valenti does give Chucky O'Brien a ride at a restaurant across the street from Jack's car wash. And this is not his usual pickup spot at the end of the day, which is this. Usually he goes to the parking lot at the Marcus Red Fox to get picked up, at least in the preceding week. So he changed where he was getting
Who does
picked
he
up.
get picked up by?
His friend Marvin Adele.
Okay.
But instead, on this day, Marvin Adele arrived at Jack's car wash, sees Chucky on the curb, and picks up Chucky. And also, Marvin Adele gets his car washed at Jack's car wash and gets it fueled up, he says. So the gas receipt and the Jack's car wash receipt, they could be genuine.
Right.
They,
But genuine from,
From-
4:15 or 4:30.
yeah, from Chucky O'Brien being like, I'll pay for Marvin's
Yeah,
car wash.
because there's no timestamp.
Yeah. And also there's kind of just, I think there's just an intuitive plausibility to it because Chucky O'Brien is getting rides from Marvin Adele all this week. It's kind of like, you give me a ride, I pay for your gas.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get a car wash. But after the disappearance, after this whole timeline, O'Brien suspiciously also got a new position as a general organizer for the Southern Conference of Teamsters, well out of Detroit and well out of any pro-Hoffa forces, which had no apparent duties at all. It paid $25,000 per year, which is $146,000 in today's money. And it had a new car, which I believe was a Cadillac, and a travel stipend. And the only thing, as far as the FBI could tell from interviewing witnesses, that the job appeared to require is reporting to Frank Fitzsimmons directly.
Okay.
And this position was only offered to O'Brien, as far as anybody could tell, in the week before Hoffa's disappearance.
Mr. Bergoglio, let me just ask you straight out. Did you kill Jimmy Hoffa, or did you have anything to do with it whatsoever?
No comment.
Can one read anything into that no comment, sir?
You can read whatever you desire to.
Bergoglio was gunned down outside Benito's restaurant. It was shortly after 11 last night. The scene just 1 block north of Umberto's Clam House.
Of course, you and your brother and Mr. Andretta, I believe, all took the Fifth Amendment in Detroit today, did you not?
No comment.
2 men appeared. They started to argue with Bergoglio, pushed him into the street, fired 5 shots into him, and fled, possibly on foot, although there was a report the men had taken off in a car on Grand Street.
Can one read anything into that at all?
Do as you desire.
Can one read anything into that at all?
Do as you desire.
What other kind of evidence have we got?
Yeah, so right now we've just got like a couple of messy timelines. At least we seem to know like when Hoffa was last alive. O'Brien's timeline seems to be sketchy, but he has some scraps of evidence. And so the FBI kind of the investigation turns to the physical evidence. Because in the day after the abduction, they do find Hoffa's car is just left in the parking lot of the Marcus Red Fox. So they examine that. They don't find much of note. And then they turn their attention to the car that Chucky O'Brien admitted he was driving.
The Maroon Grand Marquis.
Precisely. Joey Giacaloni's car. And first they decide that they're going to, because they're treating this as like a disappearance, like an abduction, they're going to see if Hoffa's scent is in the car. This is 75, they don't have a lot they can do at the time, but they do have scent dogs, and scent dogs are still used today. The sense receptors in a dog's nose passages are absolutely insane, and it turns out that it's like a whole, for those who have read about this or not, like it's a whole neurological system, like the part of their brain that would get the olfactory receptors is way outsized from where it should be and way more complex than it is in more complex than it is in the human. And they're apparently like continuously cycling through sense. So I think I read something that like a single dog of a certain type, I think it was a bloodhound, you can detect blood in the parts per trillion range of air.
Damn.
Whereas we obviously can't smell blood in much, much lower orders of magnitude ranges at all.
Yeah.
But these particular scent dogs, they used two different teams to kind of check their work. Because the thing that scent dogs get criticized for is that they respond to handler cues, right? They also can really detect when their handler is excited about something or wants them to detect something, and they want to reward their handler because they're a nice guy who gives them treats. But in this case, they use three different dogs in two different teams with two different handlers, and all three of the dogs alerted for Jimmy Hoffa's scent because they've been given like a piece of like stuff that he had handled as a comparison. And they alerted for Jimmy Hoffa's scent in the exact same place, in the same area of the back seat of the Mercury Marquis. One of them alerted in the trunk, but the FBI reasoned that like the scent could have drifted. And that gets into like a little bit of a gross part of this science, which was explained to me once by a K9 officer I deposed, which is that people are just giving off skin wrappings at all times.
Yeah.
And apparently the way that like quote unquote dogs smell fear is not that they smell you giving off any special like fear pheromones or anything like that. It's that when you are afraid or your heart's beating faster, you're giving off like orders of magnitude more skin wrappings. And they can smell that in the air.
So skin wrappings is just dead skin.
It's just skin falling off and drifting into the air. And because they can detect things in like the parts per billion or parts per trillion range, they're smelling it fully.
It's not hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why you wear a bunny suit.
So when we're talking about
all the time.
As Peter does.
As I do.
Yeah.
As I'm doing right now.
It's a masculine thing.
Yeah.
It's a
yeah, this is the new mask lifestyle, the new new masculine.
Bunny suit all the time.
Yeah.
So when you talk about like skin wrapping drifting from one part of the car to another, I think that's what we can mean, is that skin drifted from the opening beneath the back seat into the trunk. Not that he was necessarily stored in the trunk, because the dogs didn't find anything else in the trunk.
Yeah.
They also found a hair or set of hairs that was wedged in the headrest of that same area of the car in the back seat. And this hair, you know, what they could tell at the time in the 1970s was that if you compared it to Jimmy Hoffa's hair, it looked alike. And this was kind of pseudo-scientific at the time, just like comparing hairs and being like, ah, yes, this is a white male Caucasian hair. This also looks like this hair. But the hairs looked alike. They looked like they could have come from the same person. The FBI also did what's called a phenolphthalein test on the hair, which is a way of testing whether that blood is present, and it came back positive. And they inferred from that like maybe this could have come from a struggle. Like this hair didn't just like fall out like many hairs do during the course of the day, because there's a root to it. The root's still attached and has blood on it.
Investigators did find one foreign hair with the root intact.
When an analyst finds a bulb on a hair, typically that means that the hair had been forcefully removed.
Because we don't have access to all of the Hoffa files, the Hoffa family has actually sued and been rebuffed. And I know Jack Goldsmith has more, but he's not necessarily allowed to share them all or whatever. But there are other indications from journalists who had FBI sources. So Stephen Brill in 1978 says that he was told by an FBI source that besides what was put out publicly, that they had this hair that tested positive for blood, that there were much more definite signs of Hoffa's blood, hair, and skin in the Mercury Marquis.
So there's reasonably good physical evidence that Jimmy Hoffa was in that car.
Yes.
And
there is a critique of it, which we'll get to, but yeah.
And which, I mean, there'd be no other reason why he would have been in that car previously, right?
No.
Okay.
No. So the criticism of this later on is that maybe there was an accidental transference.
Right.
One of the Giacalonis, I think it's Vito Giacalone, helped the Hoffas in like the month previous with like cleaning up a room of the house.
Yeah.
And he rolled up a carpet from that house.
Right.
And the thought is that like maybe one of Hoffa's hairs transferred onto the carpet, which then got put into the car, and then it gets transferred in the marquee.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the FBI did not at this time did not buy that theory. That comes from an FBI agent much later on in the 2000s. And I don't necessarily buy it either.
Would the hair have been enough to trigger the bloodhounds' scent response if there weren't also skin wrappings?
No, because it was also they alerted in a slightly different area of the car.
Yeah.
That the FBI eventually believed that Jimmy Hoffa sat in.
Right. Yes.
When
The hair was somewhere.
The hair was in the headrest.
Yes.
Like directly upward from that area.
Right, and the dogs are discriminating enough that
Yeah.
if that was what they smelled, they would gesture towards the headrest.
Right.
Good dogs.
So the FBI's theory, at least, as it came together in the mid-1970s, was this. O'Brien was contacted by Tony Giacalone to act as bait for Hoffa to enter the car on the pretext that this is a peace meeting with Provenzano. And, you might not be good with O'Brien, but at least you know that your one-time adopted son is not going to kill you.
Yeah.
Tony Jack and Tony Bro likely received higher level commission approval, like mafia commission approval, for taking out Hoffa from Tony Pro's higher up, probably Russell Buffalino. The FBI reasoned that the commission gave this approval on the basis of the danger that Jimmy Hoffa's new presidency presented their business interests in kind of just siphoning off money from the pension funds. O'Brien, in the FBI's view, hesitated, kind of trying to slow walk his role in the abduction, which is why he was late, why he makes so many calls to Tony Giacalone, why Hoffa is standing there outside the Red Fox, like well after 2:30, like at least 15 minutes after 2:30, being like, where the hell are they? But as the FBI believed, Hoffa got into that Mercury Marquis, which may have had his killers inside. And the FBI in 1978, and many of them beyond, including today, believed that the key killer was Salvatore Briguglio, that lieutenant of Tony Pro. The FBI was kind of put on to Briguglio in this case on the basis of a very speculative tip from a former Tony Provenzano crew member who was locked up named Ralph Picardo. Picardo has a lot of credibility problems. But based on the definite role of Tony Provenzano, since Tony Provenzano is part of the plot, Picardo probably reasoned, well, he probably put his like best hitter on it.
Yeah.
This is, of course, true that like Tony Pro had a role in it. After all, Hoffa made clear to everyone that he thought he was supposed to meet with Tony Provenzano. And there are inexplicable phone calls leading up to the murder from local 299 in Detroit to local 560, Tony Provenzano's local. And these could only be coming from, as the FBI believed, from Chucky O'Brien sitting in his office to Tony Pro's men.
Nobody else had access to that phone line.
Nobody else had business calling 560.
Yeah.
Was their thought. Tony Pro, after all, was the prime mover in arranging the meetup and sit down. And the FBI also kind of based their suspicion here on the prior modus operandi of the Castellito killing. Complete alibis for the people who organized it, total disappearance, and bait, like a bait meeting. But Ralph Picardo basically constructed this from like a if they did it story, right?
Yeah.
He kind of like external OJ.
Right.
And he.
Yeah, it's all circumstantial.
Yeah, but like his account was that a member of Tony Pro's crew, Stephen Andretta, came to meet him in jail and was like, hey, has the FBI talked to you about any involvement in the whole Hoffa thing? Because let me tell you, I wasn't involved, but these other guys were. And let me just tell you how it went down. And also they put him in a 55-gallon drum and it went into a truck. And that truck belonged to Gateway Transportation. And then it went to a dump. You know the dump we know about. And the FBI wasn't able to corroborate any part of this except for Stephen Andretta did visit Ralph Picardo, the snitch, on one day. So it's not really hard evidence. It's just a very plausible story.
Yeah. And which, of course, accepts that Hoffa was killed in this encounter.
Right.
And that it was due to, I mean, I don't know who else it would be, but it had something to do with the meeting with Provenzano. And
Right.
it wasn't just like some theoretical third party was like keeping track of Hoffa's movements
Mhm.
and then use that as an opportunity to get rid of him.
Right.
Which, I mean, who would that even be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like very the way that it was talked about with Stephen Brill was like, yeah, this all seems really obvious. Like meet with me and then I'm not there and then you're gone. But the way that people who operate in this game think about it is not what's obvious.
Yeah.
Like to
It's what can be proven in a court of law.
exactly. And if they alibi out and all you have is just your hunches and what's plausible, then it doesn't fucking matter if it seems obvious to you
Right.
that like Tony Provenzano was involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that moment in a lot of like, serial killer movies or whatever, where like, we know who it is, like the cops know who it is supposedly, and they know he's gonna strike again, but like, those goddamn evidence rules. And
Goddamn evidence rules.
yeah,
Well, like to be clear, in this case, like all of the agents and all of the DAs and well, AUSAs in this case want to go after Provenzano,
sure.
but there's like just not like a basis. They would be roasted in court.
Oh yeah, no, I get that. Yeah,
And the court's willing to like hand them a lot. Like all of these members of Tony Provenzano's crew get like pulled before the grand jury. I think Salvatore Bergoglio gets pulled before the grand jury and he goes out to talk to his attorney, something like it was like many hundreds of times during the testimony where they're like, so like, where were you in this day? He's like, I need to go consult with my attorney, leaves the grand jury room, comes back and does that like several hundred more times.
Oh wow. Yeah, because I assume he has an alibi.
Yeah, so this is where the FBI's speculative hunch actually starts to get some traction to it. Salvatore Bergoglio's alibi and the alibi of also his brother Gabriel Bergoglio and the Andretta brothers is that at this time that they're supposed to be abducting Jimmy Hoffa and killing him because they're the killers from the crew that he's supposed to meet with, they were actually at Local 560 in New Jersey playing a complicated game of Greek rummy. And they're like, we were playing cards the entire day, which as Stephen Brill pointed out, does not say much for like, we were carrying out our union duties as like union treasurer and organizer and stuff. They're just like, it was a Wednesday, so we were just with the boys, playing cards.
Playing, normal rummy wasn't enough for us anymore. We had to get Greek with it.
But the weird thing is so every time Bergoglio is interviewed about this alibi, it starts to fall apart. And at first, there's other witnesses at Local 560 who are probably, of course, living in fucking terror.
Right.
Because they could just end up killed.
Oh, yeah.
But those witnesses at first are like, oh yeah, we saw them around and they went up there and played cards. And then at least one or two of the witnesses started backing out. Probably when members of Local 560 started getting indicted for other things. Like the Bergoglios get indicted for their role in Castellito's murder. So does Provenzano. Eventually the feds take over 560. So witnesses start backing off these alibis. In an interview with Dan Mulday, and I really will give him credit on this one because I know I'm critical of him a lot of times. He interviewed Bergoglio, and Bergoglio denied any role in Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance. And then Mulday is like, so where were you? And he explains the whole like Greek rummy thing. And Bergoglio's lawyer, who's also the lawyer of Provenzano and everyone else, Bill Buffalino, is there to kind of monitor what he says. And Bergoglio's like, well, maybe I left the Greek rummy game because I had a headache.
Yeah.
Not a good way to contradict yourself there. Like maybe people didn't see me at the relevant times because I went home.
Right, yeah. I mean, why wouldn't they all just say we were at home?
Because that's the least verifiable alibi. Yeah. The joy of the Greek rummy alibi is everyone can alibi each other out.
Right, yeah. Because,
I know Gabriel Bergoglio was here because I was playing cards with him, and so was everybody else who's also a suspect.
Yeah, everybody can. I feel like that's a less credible alibi, logically speaking, when all your friends are criminals.
Yeah.
But I realize that's not how, law works.
Well, I mean, it kind of does. Like they would get impeached by prior convictions and stuff like that.
Okay.
But the thing is they all alibi each other out, right? And then they have other people at Local 560, like the secretaries and so on, say like, oh yeah, I saw him go up on the elevator and then he would be upstairs. I didn't see him leave until this time of the day. And that helps the alibi, but it starts to deteriorate.
Yeah.
And this is an interesting little aside, because a lot of people know about Frank Sheeran from the movie The Irishman.
Yeah.
And being like a gangster teamster in Delaware. And let me just say this, just as an aside. So Frank Sheeran claims like literally he killed Jimmy Hoffa in the book I Heard You Paint Houses. He also claims like a lot of other stuff, like Jimmy Hoffa's just like mouthing off. He's like, oh yeah, and we killed Kennedy. Frank Sheeran apparently in his like original like galley for the book, there's just nothing about killing Jimmy Hoffa. He had no role in the killing. And that didn't do well. And then he made a new, version of the book where he kills Jimmy Hoffa. And that's the basis of the movie The Irishman.
Wow.
So as far as anybody who is investigating the case can actually tell, Frank Sheeran's really like nefarious role in this is in the months leading up to Hoffa's disappearance, he himself went from the pro-Hoffa faction to the pro-Fitzsimmons faction and cut off contact with Hoffa. And he was in Detroit when Hoffa disappeared. And he played a major role in jamming up these witnesses at Local 560 who were there to back up the alibis of people. Like he was the one calling up and being like, you remember this story, right? So it's not.
So when you say jamming,
like intimidating.
Yeah.
Like
Keeping them in line.
Keeping them in line, keeping tabs on what they're saying, who they're talking to, and so on. Like that is his like nefarious, sinister role in the Hoffa disappearance is like cleaning up and being an accomplice to the actual killers. And it's not only not heroic, it's not like famous, it's not even like infamous. It's just shitty.
Yeah. And I mean he gave birth to Ed Sheeran. So, not the least of his crimes.
God. Ed Sheeran's role in the Jimmy Hoffa disappearance. Salvatore Bergoglio, though, as kind of the lead suspect or lead person of interest as being the murderer himself, like the guy who did the killing because he was a killer. He eventually gets indicted on the murder of Three Fingers Castellito. This puts a lot of pressure on him, which is exactly what it's supposed to do, because the feds all think that he did Jimmy Hoffa's murder. He played the major role in the disappearance. And they want him to roll over on who ordered him to do that disappearance. So with an indictment for another murder, the thought was maybe he'll plead out, maybe he'll make a deal. And in the months leading up to Bergoglio's eventual death himself, his own eventual death, I should say, he does a very interesting interview with Stephen Brill, which indicates how much he was willing to tell. And this interview, in my opinion, was like all but a confession.
When did this interview take place?
In 1978, a few months before he died, as I understand.
In about 3 years, so like within 2-3 years
of the disappearance. Yeah. And he would have no advantage in sharing this information, but the interview happened in 1977. Brill kind of put all this in an asterisk, even though it's almost like the tape that plays at the end of A Thin Blue Line.
Right.
As far as its level of just telling what happened and who did it. But Brill writes in an asterisk, like in a footnote at the bottom of the page, Salvatore Bergoglio and I talked in 1977 with the ground rule that I would not reveal our discussions. On March 21st, 1978, he, Bergoglio, was murdered. Our talks, which were conducted privately, were rambling and touched on the murder only occasionally. Even then, he only passively confirmed with a nod of his head certain relatively minor aspects of the crime that I put before him. He offered no elaboration and never revealed enough to implicate anyone except possibly himself. And then when you turn to what he thinks Bergoglio confirmed, it's far more specific than that footnote would lead you to think. According to Brill is kind of summarized the FBI's theory on specifically how Hoffa's abduction and murder went down. Talks about, of course, how this meeting was set up, how Hoffa likely saw Chucky O'Brien and thought, probably Bergoglio as well, and thought, okay, this is confirmation, this meeting is a go. I'm going to get into this car and be taken to another spot away from the Marcus Red Fox, where we're going to have the sit-down meeting with Tony Pro. The quote, the two men in the car with Hoffa, along with O'Brien, were Salvatore Bergoglio and either Gabriel Bergoglio or Thomas Andretta. At this point, Hoffa thought he was still going to a meeting. He knew the Bergoglios and he knew they were Tony Pro's men. He simply assumed that they had been dispatched with O'Brien, a Giacalone ally, to pick him up. One of the Bergoglios, or Thomas Andretta, sitting in the backseat, knocked Hoffa out with the butt of a gun during the first few minutes of the car ride. Quote, this was implied to me by Bergoglio, and it makes sense. They couldn't just pull a gun on Hoffa to get him to go somewhere. And also, this is precisely how, I'm not quoting anymore, it's precisely how they took out Three Fingers Castellito. It's the same MO. And I really wish that we could hear the tape, or at least see the notes of this conversation with Bergoglio, considering he's just kind of like nodding along, and then he directly implies like, oh, like maybe someone hit him with a gun in the first few minutes of the ride.
Yeah.
And given the timing of this, and it's after he's indicted for murder of Castellito, I feel like he's thinking that he's gonna talk anyways. Maybe talk to the FBI for a deal. And then that's why in 1978, Salvatore Bergoglio gets shot by two identified men who run off, and
Did you say identified or
unidentified men? He gets shot by two unidentified men who run off, and that murder has never been solved.
In New Jersey?
I believe he's shot in New York, actually.
Okay. So just to be clear, the last like whereabouts of that car, as far as O'Brien was concerned, as far as his testimony went, was at Jack's, where he left it to get in the car of his friend, Adela.
So not quite. So O'Brien says that he took the car from Jack's car wash to Liftall.
He took it, he brought it to Liftall. So that was the last time as far. And then, you know, the younger Giacalone, Joey Giacalone then took him to Jack's. So as far as like the O'Brien timeline is concerned, that car is at the Giacalones.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to correct you again.
No, it's fine.
But, and I know this gets confusing. So O'Brien says that he goes to Liftall, and then Joey Giacalone drives him to local 299.
Oh, right.
Where Joe Valenti drives him to
multiple steps
Jack's.
in the chain.
Yeah, he gets so many rides.
Why doesn't he have his own car?
I don't know.
How does he expect to, you know, get like?
I mean, as some people who, you know, consider
always
themselves
been
students of this case point out, maybe the whole reason for needing this kind of like musical chairs of cars is that in order to abduct Hoffa, you would need to, and to show that you're serious, you can't just show up in like the local 299 station wagon.
Right.
You need to show up in a really nice car that is associated with Tony Giacalone. So Joey Giacalone lent him his car. If what the FBI later says is right, also Hoffa knows this car because it's been at his house on Lake Orion already, at least once or twice. So per the FBI, Salvatore Bergoglio knocks out Hoffa, maybe strangles him, and then he was either killed at the car or a third location, maybe a restaurant because they got a tip about that. And then the body is disposed of. The killers then return to New Jersey by, the FBI thinks, a private plane, because they don't actually have to leave much in the way of records at these like little tiny municipal airports in Detroit at the time. The final thing I want to say is that, you know, over time, the FBI started out with like this physical evidence that was kind of suggestive, but one could easily, if you were a defense attorney at the time, be like, okay, you got some dogs to say that they smelled him there, and you have this hair that kind of looks like his hair. Like, where's the actual evidence? There's no fingerprints, there's no body, there's nothing. So the tissue on that hair, or hairs rather, was tested for DNA in the late 90s. And that is Hoffa's hair. Hoffa, that part of him was in that car. There are these later FBI attempts to say that like maybe that hair got transferred, but the
Right,
fact that
the
it,
carpet or whatever.
yeah, but the fact that it was a hair with blood on it,
Mm,
with that much tissue that you could test it in 97 and 99,
yeah,
it makes me think that it's kind of, it fits so seamlessly
right, with
with,
the head wound.
yeah, and with Bergoglio's suggestion that he clocked him with the
Yeah.
butt of a gun.
Yeah,
I think Hoffa was in that car,
yeah,
especially since there's not really a good accounting for what else
right.
Chucky did with that car other than go from Southfield Athletic Club
Mm,
to the Marcus Red Fox to a third location and then to Liftall, where probably Joey Giacalone had no idea what the car was used for, except maybe like, hey, just shut up about the car.
yeah,
Because he doesn't seem to have cleaned it,
right,
leaving all his guns and shit in there.
yeah,
But we're gonna steel man this.
okay.
All right.
We like that.
Jack Goldsmith made a counter timeline.
Who's Jack Goldsmith?
Jack Goldsmith is the stepson of Charles O'Brien.
Oh, so he's sort of the Charlie O'Brien to Charlie O'Brien's Hoffa.
Except in contrast to Chucky O'Brien, Jack Goldsmith is like a success son.
Yeah, he's like a good son trying to do right by his.
He is a Harvard professor.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And like evidently he seems to like his stepdad because he's trying to exonerate him.
Yeah, you can tell it in Hoffa's Shadow that he has like kind of a tortured relationship with his stepdad, because his stepdad was like a very, very loving stepdad, and in a way that, you know, is just admirable and
Sure.
he didn't get from his original family. And at the same time, like Charles O'Brien was very explicit that like he believed in omerta.
Yeah.
Like he will never rat on like mafia people. And there's even kind of these like wink and nod implications of like, I'm not a made man, or am I, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not Italian, or am I? Because his original name is not O'Brien.
Right, yeah.
And he even tells him in the book, you know, do you really think I've actually told you everything I know? Like, no, I didn't.
Mhm.
I'm paraphrasing a bit. But yeah, Jack Goldsmith is Charles O'Brien's son. He believes O'Brien to be flatly innocent of the abduction, of a role in the abduction at all, even like an unwitting one. He believes him innocent of driving Hoffa to his death, is what he says. Goldsmith was also an ex-federal prosecutor, so the feds actually talked to him and FBI agents talked to him, in contrast to your lovely co-hosts, I suppose. And it was during the Bush administration, during surveillance, which as a role he says he regrets and made him critical of the Bush administration, but he still has his political sympathies of sorts.
The W. Bush administration.
The W. Bush administration, yes. And I will say, you know, for the record, Goldsmith was super nice to me when
yeah.
I emailed him back. That doesn't mean I buy his timeline.
Hmm.
Here's the key thing that Goldsmith believes exonerates his stepfather, Charles O'Brien, in being a tool of Hoffa's disappearance. Goldsmith says that Hoffa is still alive by 3:30 p.m. And I'll explain why this is critical. Goldsmith says that he believes Louis Linteau's account of the timing of Hoffa's phone call. So Louis Linteau, in contrast to the phone records that the FBI found, says that Hoffa called him around 3:30, interrupting that call with Mr. Carter. Several other employees of Louis Linteau's company that called ASL, that Airport Services Limousine, they all claim that the call happened between 3 and 3:30 p.m. They can't quite remember when. All of them denied that they were the one who picked up the call and got Louis Linteau on the line, which somebody did. Like somebody picked up the call and said, oh, it's Jimmy Hoffa, I better get Louis Linteau. But they all denied being that person. So all these witnesses say that Linteau got back around 3 to 3:30 p.m. at ASL. And if Louis Linteau gets back to the office at ASL, then he can't take the Hoffa call until 3:30 p.m. or like at the earliest like 3 p.m. because he's not there. He's not there at the place. So
that would make Hoffa alive at 3:30.
Right.
June 30th.
July 30th, yes.
July 30th. And probably June 30th that year too.
Alive at both times,
Yeah.
yeah. He didn't die and come back. You are right.
He's not that much like Jesus.
So per Linteau, Hoffa calls at 3:30 or at the earliest 3 o'clock, and says the sons of bitches are an hour and a half late. So Hoffa thinks that they're supposed to meet him at 2, and it's an hour and a half, so it's 3:30, and he's still alive. So the inference for Goldsmith is that since Chucky O'Brien is seen at local 299 at the end of the day without enough time in between for him to like abduct Hoffa, drive him to his death, and get to local 299 by 4 o'clock, if Hoffa's still alive at 3:30, then O'Brien couldn't have done it.
Mm.
And just to recap, because I know that was like a little bit confusing, Goldsmith acknowledges like there isn't like full corroboration for like where Chucky is when at certain times, but there's at least he at least has to do certain things. Like he has to drop off that car at Liftall, and then he has to go to local 299 to be seen by Joe Valenti at like between 4 and 4:15. And for him to do that, for him to go to the Holmes house and then go to Liftall and then go to local 299 by 4:15, he can't be all the way at the Marcus Red Fox at 3:30 p.m. because then he can't kill Hoffa, drop off the car, get to local 299. That's a great argument. Per Goldsmith, Chucky delivers the Coho salmon and leaves the Holmes residence at 2:10 to 2:20 p.m. according to one witness. That's not too strong, but that's what Goldsmith goes with. He then goes to Jack's car wash.
Who's the witness in that case? Is it one of the Holmes
it's
kids?
actually Bobby Holmes Sr.'s wife.
Okay.
Is the witness who says he left between 2:10 and 2:20. I think it's an overestimate, but that's all this is. It's just like people's memories and witness estimates. Unless there's something to like anchor it in place.
I'd
can
hate
move
to
around a
have
lot.
to answer those types of questions.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And then especially if if you know that like your answer might be like getting someone and trust and love, like
in
sent
jail.
to prison. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. But according to Goldsmith, so he leaves at 2:10 to 2:20 p.m. He's got one witness for that. Goldsmith says that Chucky then goes to Jack's car wash to wash off the fish blood, leaving by 2:40 p.m. Again, no witnesses.
And still fish blood in the car.
And still fish blood in the car. But again, Goldsmith actually denies that there was any fish blood.
Okay.
He's just like, there was no blood.
Right. You mentioned that
Yeah.
earlier, but the FBI says there was. And the FBI also says the car was a mess generally.
Yeah, and that's something that you can't deny is that Chucky's fingerprints are still like all over the car.
Yeah.
If you have people detailing your car and wiping every surface off, like there shouldn't be any fingerprints.
Certainly not.
So after Jack's car wash, he then goes to Liftall, Joey Giacaloni's car company, to drop off the car, in which takes another 35 minutes driving at a minimum from Jack's car wash. But I should note that Jack's car wash is not that far from the Southfield Athletic Club where people actually see him at that time. He then goes from Liftall to local 299, where he is definitely seen by some people around 3:30 or 4 or 4:30 at the very, very latest. And then the only witness to the timing of the Liftall drop, I should say, is Joey Giacaloni, who is not exactly a disinterested witness. He's not exactly like, oh, I wouldn't say anything bad about my dad or imply he's involved in killing at all.
Yeah.
And then he has that ride from Joe Valenti to Jack's car wash again. Where he's picked up. So QED, no time, didn't commit the crime. Just didn't have the time.
Yeah. If you don't have the time, can't do the crime.
Yep. So here's why I think that this timeline doesn't work. And it is an innocence timeline. With few exceptions, the basic signposts in this journey from like the fish drop off to Jack's car wash to Liftall to local 299. Jack's car wash again is based on like vague recollections from people that change depending on the interview and have like no firm signpost in time to anchor it in, like a receipt or a thing that you did afterwards that was time stamped in some way. There's just nothing there, but like kind of what people remember, which is why they move around all the time in like every interview. Now, others have pointed out that even under this timeline, an abduction by Chucky is actually still kind of possible. That like, oh, the journey from Jack's car wash to Liftall is actually not that long. He's wrong. I don't think that matters. I think that's kind of moot because this timeline only shows that O'Brien is innocent if Hoffa wasn't abducted until 3:30 p.m.
Yes.
Or after 3:30 p.m.
Yes.
And the problem here is that we have So there's 5 eyewitnesses of the last point when Hoffa's alive, right? These are confirmed witnesses that see Hoffa and interact with him conservatively at a rate of 1 witness every 8 to 9 minutes from 2:05 p.m. to 2:45 or 2:50. Okay. For this 3:30 call to happen at that rate would have to drop to 0 practically after 2:45 p.m. or to 1 witness every 45 minutes from 8 to 9 to 45. And the FBI says like this shopping center is literally one of the busiest shopping centers in Detroit. There are just people milling around, and the reason that you're having like 1 witness every 8 to 9 minutes is they're walking outside the Marcus Red Fox, this like kind of hoity-toity restaurant at the time at least, and being like, holy shit, Jimmy Hoffa. And he's talking to them. And they remember it. Like loads of people pass by in the time.
Yeah.
So to just say it's not like an empty parking lot, like at the end of a day. It's not 8 p.m., 9 p.m.
Yeah. There's a steady stream of foot traffic.
Right. And it doesn't make sense that this would just drop off to nothing.
So if we're steel manning,
Yeah.
the thing, trying to think of that, like why there would be this gap would be, is there the possibility that Jimmy Hoffa went, made his phone call, and then came back and waited in his car where he would be less visible?
You know, that is a good steel manning possibility. And I will say that like, as to this point, it's probably the strongest argument. He leaves the vicinity of the Marcus Red Fox, right? He goes to this hardware store, makes his call, says the sons of bitches aren't here. And he's like, I'm getting in my car. He gets in his car where people are not going to like super visibly see him, except for the delivery truck driver.
And the truck driver saw him outside of the car or in the car?
Getting into the car.
Getting into the red car, the maroon car.
Yes, and he said that there were 3 other people in the car.
Yes, okay, so that is.
That he could see, besides the driver.
Yeah, well, like how does Goldsmith deal with that?
So, I mean, Goldsmith doesn't really deal with like the rate of witnesses he's seen.
Yeah.
It's just like he could have been somewhere else.
Yes.
And also there is a little bit of wiggle room in the Lintow call. But I would say like the fatal thing is still the timestamp on Lintow's other call. Because this is the one thing we have from like a phone company that says like, there was a call that Louis Lintow made in the order of things he did that day. And that was at 2:35 p.m. He called local 299. The important thing there isn't just that like after that call, he does a call where Hoffa comes into the call, right?
Yeah.
2:35, and then his next thing is that call where Hoffa gets on. The important thing is that Lintow says he's not even back at ASL, his company, until 3 p.m. or 3:05. So if he's not there at 3:05, he can't make a call to local 299, 2:35.
Yeah, because of the distances involved.
Yeah, because he says he was out at lunch that entire time.
Okay.
So it completely shows this story to be wrong. And 2 out of 3 of Lintow's own employees don't place the call at 3:30 when he says it is. They place it at like 3 p.m.
Yeah.
Which is honestly still kind of plausibly within the timeline.
Within Goldsmith's time.
Well, outside Goldsmith's time, like more like in the Chucky did it timeline.
Yes.
Because it's closer to 2:50 when people last see Hoffa alive.
Yeah.
And even the FBI like makes a note that in interviews with employees and with people who know Lintow, that they are like absolutely loyal to them and will do anything for him.
Yes. And in Goldsmith's version, Chucky, does he still go to the athletic club?
No.
Okay, but he had witnesses there.
But there are witnesses who put him there, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Chucky was seen by at least 2 witnesses with Tony Giacalone who had no reason to lie, like no benefit from him or themselves, who say that he was at the Southfield Athletic Club. In other words, these aren't guys who were trying to be alibi witnesses.
Yeah.
Like there was a washing machine repairman who sees Chucky.
Right.
There was a guy in the parking lot who sees Chucky there.
Yeah.
And the other aspect here is that, like I said before, the car may not have actually needed to be cleaned because like this fish was not like a gigantic fish.
Right, yeah.
I do think that, there probably was some like fluid because it's like ice in a cardboard box and stuff,
bullshit.
but it wasn't like gushing with like Japanese horror movie amounts of blood,
Yeah.
like a Junji Ito thing.
Yeah, so what does Goldsmith like present like an alternative theory?
Yeah, so Goldsmith is like very, very confident when he talks about like what he thinks happened in the case and like what he says. He says the FBI has completely like gotten rid of any responsibility by the Bergoglios and by the local 560 people. And now the killer is that the FBI has found out that a low level Detroit mafia guy was the actual killer of Jimmy Hoffa, that it was commissioned still by Tony Giacalone, that Tony Provenzano had some kind of vague role, but the FBI has based this on stuff that they've heard in wiretaps, and they know that this new theory is the way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And this is apparently what they've been pursuing for like 30 years. It's not anything that they talked about in the 70s, but this like new theory.
Mm-hmm. The new hotness.
And students of the Hoffa case online actually know like who they're talking about and everything. But the killer was now alleged to be a guy named Tony Palazzolo, a Detroit partnership capo. So in the early 1990s, Palazzolo was caught on a wire claiming he killed Jimmy Hoffa and fed him into a sausage grinder at his business called the American Sausage Company.
Oof.
And the FBI noted that Palazzolo was like a low-ranking guy before Hoffa's disappearance and then rapidly went up in the Detroit partnership afterwards.
So he wasn't a capo in the 70s.
Exactly.
But he had a sausage business.
But he had his sausage company. I think there's an obvious alternate explanation for why a guy would suddenly rise into Detroit partnership after the Hoffa disappearance, which is the FBI came down hard.
Yeah.
Everybody came down hard on the Detroit partnership after the Hoffa disappearance, as well as like many other mafia figures. These guys got investigated every which way. All of the people that we've talked about, all of them, Chucky O'Brien, the Bergoglios, the Andrettas, people that I'm about to talk about, the Giacalones, all of them go to prison. Like all of them get indicted because the FBI and Justice Department and journalists are just going through every single thing they did.
Right, and they're not getting put in prison for Hoffa, but they are getting put in prison for other stuff that they did in the course of their criminal enterprises.
Right, exactly. So with that in mind, it's pretty easy for, the foot soldiers and the sergeants in the organization to kind of rise up through the ranks in the years following and get respect on that basis.
Oh yeah, once
the other
again,
thing
like
is,
an urban legend and everything.
Yeah, also like the Detroit partnership is like 50 people.
Yeah.
He rose up in the group of 50 people.
Right, yeah.
I am gonna say this, like maybe Palazzolo was involved.
Right.
Like, I don't know. I'm skeptical because like the account of like I fed his body into a sausage grinder is as stupid sounding as all of the other like fake Hoffa's body is here accounts that I've ever heard. It's very lurid. It's very bloody, and the person's like, ha ha ha.
Yeah. Most sausage grinders, commercial sausage grinders, probably not fit for disposing of a whole human body, would be my guess.
I would think so. Maybe he read The Jungle.
Yeah, maybe.
It was just like that Upton Sinclair book. That's how I did Hoffa.
Like, I know like people do cheap meat, but like it's not like you're putting bones in there most of the time, are you?
No.
Yeah.
No. And also, like, what the fuck are you gonna do with the sausage grinder afterwards?
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't.
You need that for your sausage business.
The other pieces of information that link Palazzolo don't even really count as circumstantial evidence. So Tony Zerilli, who at one time was the head of the Detroit partnership and was eventually deposed, like became no longer the head, he gave the FBI a whole story of what he believed to be Palazzolo's involvement in the crime, with no sausage making. But this time, Palazzolo kills Hoffa and apparently told Tony Zerilli where he buried it, and the FBI searched that place and found nothing. Tony Zerilli, of course, said they dug in the wrong spot. My story is still valid, but this story honestly seems to be potentially one of many stories that was told about Hoffa's disappearance as part of what kind of has come to be known as kind of a disinformation campaign.
Has come to be known, or you have come to theorize?
Has come to be known. I'm not the first person to say that like the mob did like a disinformation campaign where they, rather than just keeping quiet about the Hoffa disappearance, instead telling like hundreds of stories
Right.
about the Hoffa disappearance, to the
Yeah.
point where like every wise guy who wants to like get a few years off their sentence is like, okay, well, this guy told me where Jimmy Hoffa's body is.
Yeah.
And then it turns out to be nothing, because the guy actually did tell him that. It's just bullshit.
Right. And it kind of goes with the observed crumbling, not that it was ever as airtight as people said, but the kind of observed crumbling of like, you know, the adherence to the Omerta Code
Mhm.
that you eventually started seeing in the late 20th century among mob guys, and also, you know, I mean, respect for the hierarchy. Again, it was always more honored in the breach than anything else.
Yeah.
But it certainly, whatever, if it was ever really adhered to, it stopped being adhered to pretty soon after this.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. The real truth, I think, the missing piece here lies with, well, the one really protected witness in this whole case. The one really obvious witness in this whole case. The person that we've been hinting at this entire time. The grandfatherly, bespectacled Frank Fitzsimmons.
President of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters.
Yeah, you would think that like the president of the Teamsters, who was like, I don't want you to be president, and who else is sending goons after you, and everything else would be like a lead suspect, especially since he knows and communicates with all of the other suspects. But yeah, you've been hearing for years and years, probably your whole life, listener, about how this is a mafia story and not a battle for control of the union between a more collaborationist type and a more of a rejectionist type. But the missing piece to both the old FBI theory and the new one, and the reason why they can't seem to bring together a coherent theory at all, has to do with Frank Fitzsimmons. And I will say the deliberate stonewalling of the investigation of Fitzsimmons is why the Hoffa murder is bracketed in all our minds as purely a gangster story and not a labor story or a political story.
Right.
But it's just a gangster story, a mafia story.
Interesting.
So the question of where is the body is kind of tangled up with this whole issue of Frank Fitzsimmons. And I'll say why.
All right, so is this like the break between the two
Yeah,
parts?
let's do it. Let's say a break.